You're not going to be able to go into Wells Fargo and be like, look, I just had this song on TikTok blow up. Can you loan me $100,000? Because I promise you, this viral song is going to lead to a lot of success and I'll be able to pay you back.
Peace, what's going down? It's DJ Payne 1. I'm joined by Dame Ritter. This is the Music Entrepreneur Club podcast powered by BeatStars. Shout out to everybody that was a part of the BeatStars Summit, the second BeatStars Summit that we've done in 2020. So shout out to you, whether you were one of the many panelists that we had on, sharing their information, sharing their expertise, or if you were just an attendee and you were active in the chat, you were lurking in the chat being creepy. It doesn't matter as long as you were there. So how are you feeling, Dan?
I'm good, but it sounds like your voice is a little groggy from talking all day yesterday, or is that just the morning pain voice?
Probably a combination.
Nah, the summit was dope. The summit was dope. I think there were a lot of gems shared. Again, education is so important, especially for independent artists, and you're trying to mimic what a record label could provide by yourself. There's a lot of different things that you should know. There's a lot of different, areas that you have to, set your business up right for, in order to kind of collect everything that's owed to you and to try to create different revenue streams. So, education is super important for independent artists. So I hoped the people that are listening to this tapped into the live summit. And if you didn't, it's recorded. And I think all of the sessions are available on BeatStars' Twitch channel and on their YouTube. So make sure you check those out.
Yeah, beatstars.world also is kind of like the hub, so check that out as well.
I know that we've touched on this before, but I keep hearing people say this, reputable people say this, it's just something that's easy to say. It's a soundbite, and it's a record label is just a bank, or a record deal is just a loan. And I think people say that because one,
they've never had a record deal.
Yeah, or they heard somebody else say it, right? So it's kind of an easy thing to say, easy thing to parrot. Or I think some people are trying to sell something, some type of service to independent artists, and you don't need that. A deal is just just a loan. A record label is just a bank. You don't need that. And then you hear that, and then you don't understand kind of how a record label works, or the value of a record label, if it works the way it's supposed to, right? Like there's a lot of situations where record deals do not work out, and we hear most of those. And I think that's why people buy into this record label is just a bank, because there's so many examples of situations not working out. So, it's easy to believe that a record deal is just a loan, or a record label is just a bank. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, because even though there are some similarities between a loan and a record deal, there definitely are some similarities. And in some cases, it's worse, right? In some cases, it's worse than a loan. But in some cases, it's a lot better, right? And I think one of the things is, like, if I go get a loan from whoever, there's going to be interest on that loan. I'm gonna have to pay it back no matter what, right? With a record deal, the money that you get, you don't have to necessarily pay that back. I mean, if things go well, you pay it back through the sales of your music. But if the label takes a loss on your situation because you don't pan out like they expected, which is a shitload of artists, right? Like there's a lot of artists that labels spend a lot of money on and never get their money back because they just placed the wrong bet, or the artist's music just didn't perform like they thought it was, or whoever brought them in, it didn't perform. So in that situation, the label probably just cuts the artist and cuts their losses. Right, that's a huge difference, right, Payne? Like that's a huge difference between getting a loan at Chase or Wells Fargo or wherever, and I don't think that can be understated. Like, you don't have to pay that back. You don't got to go get a job, and work at Wendy's and pay back the advance that you got from, Atlantic or whoever you got it from. Right. Like, that's a
Yeah.
huge difference.
Well, I'm so sick of this conversation because I've tried having it and it goes the wrong way, and then at the end of it, someone just says, "Okay, well, your definition of a loan is different from mine." I'm just like, an advance is called an advance because it's an advance. A loan is called a loan because it's a loan, because they're fundamentally different. If you have to pay a loan back, and for the last 5 decades, we've been using the word loan, not decades, centuries, we've been using the word loan to mean that it's money that you're obligated to pay back, then why are we all of a sudden using a term that's going to confuse people, especially people that don't know anything about the music business? When I was growing up, just listening to people, because people have been parroting that line that an advance is just a loan forever.
Right.
And I was listening to underground hip hop, so I was hearing that too, and I'm like, oh wow, now I see why these artists are getting screwed in the game, because a label gives them $1 million and then they spend it, and then the label comes knocking on their door saying, we need that $1 million back, and then they call the police, and that's not how it happens.
Right. So there obviously are some negatives to an advance in terms of how it works that I have a huge problem with, but let's just keep going with like the difference. And the other difference is usually an artist at the point, like I say, if they get they have one song that goes viral, then they get a big deal, whatever. Like let's just say they get, $100,000. That $100,000 that you got, like, you're not going to be able to get that from anywhere else unless you find a private investor, right? You're not going to be able to go to Wells Fargo. You're not going to be able to go into Wells Fargo and be like, look, I just had this song on TikTok blow up. Can you loan me $100,000? Because I promise you, this viral song is going to lead to a lot of success and I'll be able to pay you back, right? Like, so that's another big difference. Like, you can't go to a regular bank unless you find a private investor that believes in your talent. Like, there's another reason that it's way different from a loan that you can get from it. You just can't get it, right? And if you develop a good relationship with a label, and they still believe in you even after spending that initial money, they might spend money again. They're like, okay, we still believe in this art. They might. A lot of times you get cut and drop, but you could have a second swing. And unless you have access to capital, some other type of way, that's probably not gonna happen for you, especially a second swing. And then also, labels, if they work out, if you are a priority, I always have to, put those disclaimers in there, because sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes artists aren't a priority and you don't get access to these services. But labels have a global presence. Labels have access to radio. Labels have access to the top playlists on Spotify and Apple Music. They have access. They have relationships. That Chase doesn't have, Wells Fargo does not have, right? They don't have the PR opportunities. They don't have the marketing people in-house, the merch people in-house. Like, it's totally different. And again, you may not be a high priority, or your deal may not be set up a certain, like, we just had a distribution deal with Warner, right? So, we didn't have top priority access to some of the other things that they could provide if you signed a regular deal. So please stop saying, because when you say that a record label is just a bank, like, it stops your learning. Like, it's like, oh, okay, it's just a bank, it's just a loan. Like, it stops your learning right there. And you don't really dive into the details and figure out, like, how this situation could be different from a bank. So why do record labels exist? Like, banks already exist. Like, why don't I just go to Chase? Like, it stops your learning when you don't understand these differences. Now, on the flip side, the way money's recouped, Now that is what I have a problem with. For people that don't understand, like your money is recouped out of your percentage of the deal, right? So if it's like if it's like 80-20 or 90-10 in the label's favor, you can see in the $1 million that they gave you only gets recouped out of your percentage. Let's say it's 90-10. So your music has to make $10 million before it's recouped, because it's only being recouped out of your percent. So if you make $10 million and you only get 10% of that, then obviously $1 million is owed to you, but they gave you $1 million advance. So now that goes to pay back the $1 million advance, and then you would receive 10% going forward. To me, that's a huge flaw and problem in the music industry. And I think that's what a lot of people complain about. And I think rightfully so. Like I don't like that at all. And it's primarily because like it makes the labels like not really worry about any type of costs, right? Or definitely the cost to you. Because
Right.
if you're only making 10% on your album, let's just say you can do some advertising, and every time you spend $100 in advertising, it creates $500 in revenue, which is great. Which is great if you're an independent artist and you're able to reap the benefits of that, right? But you're only getting 10% of the 500,000 of the $500, right? So they spent 100, they made 500, but you're responsible for that 100, not them, right? Because it's being recouped out of your percentage. So that 500 that you made, you only got $50 because it's a 10% deal, but they spent 100, right? So they're going to keep spending 100 because they're making 450. I hope people can follow this math, like, because they're going to keep spending 100 because they're making 450, you're making 50, and you keep going more and more in debt, right? I hope people can follow that math. But
And in debt in the sense of on that particular account, not in the way that you have to, not traditional debt. I guess that's another thing, because there are all these terms associated with record deals and advances. Recoupment rather than what would you what would be the equivalent in a loan? I guess you pay back a loan, you recoup in advance.
right. So yeah, so when I say like you're still like going the opposite way in recoupment. You're not recouping at all, because they're spending $100. It's returning $500. So whatever the advertising is, it might be Facebook ads, it might be whatever it is. They're spending $100, and it's great because they keep earning $450, or it keeps grossing $500. But out of that $500, only 50 of that is yours, but you have to keep paying for the $100.
Yeah, and on paper it looks like you're failing as an artist to bring any money into the label, when in reality you're bringing in a lot of money. It's just the way they structured everything. So it's like banks have predatory loans, there are predatory deals, but
Yeah.
again, I just want to emphasize that if you are in the red on a label account, they're not going to send your account to collections. You don't actually owe that money. You just won't get paid anymore until you generate a positive amount in your account. That's it. And
Right.
I feel like having that conversation is so hard because, well, in order to really explain recoupment, first of all, you have to understand recoupment. And that's not necessarily the easiest thing to understand, because the average person is thinking in terms of banks, because everyone's familiar with a bank. Very few people are familiar with recoupment. Very few people are familiar with how royalty points work. Very few people are familiar with how deals are structured. Very few people are familiar with how, we talk about streams. People think there's one streaming royalty. There are at least five. And so, if a song is streamed on Spotify, which is just a regular interactive stream, the label is going to get the majority of that because they own the masters. A lot of people don't know that. And if they do know it, they don't know what the hell it means. So having these conversations just in general are really difficult. But tweeting out a record label is just a bank or an advance is just a loan is way easier. It's going to get you more retweets. People are going to agree with you. You're going to be the cool kid for the day. And that's why people do it. And you know what? I understand, because if we send out a tweet explaining the math of, one of these deals, it's going to be boring. No one's going to want to hear about it. I mean, not no one, but like maybe 2% of the people that view it are going to care enough to try to figure out what it actually involves, because it's not that interesting. I mean, it's complicated for a reason. It's not, as sexy as a conversation about who was beefing with who in rap, and it's certainly not as easy to digest as a deceptive tagline that spreads around the internet like wildfire. So I don't know. I'm painting a very depressing picture of people, and I get how when people get to the point where they're signing with a label, why a lot of them are just so frustrated, because up until then they've been reading tweets and believing myths and listening to half-truths and poorly explained business concepts their whole lives. And then here they are presented with it, and rather than spend time that whole time demystifying the process and learning about it, they've just been rebelling against it. But okay, all of a sudden there's a deal on the table. What do? Do you reject it outright? It might be a good deal. Do you accept it without understanding it because you've been believing the memes this whole time? It might be a bad deal. So you really put yourself in a bad position.
Yeah, and I hate, I'm not necessarily defending labels. Like, I just want people to understand what's going on, right? And then, like, being independent is a very real thing, and you can make a lot of money, but it's not easy. You have to, build things out yourself. You have to understand where money's being generated. You have to understand the different roles people play at labels so that you can mimic them in-house, right? There's a reason why there's not that many big independent artists, right? There's a reason for that. Like, if being independent was as glamorous as it's painted out to be on social media, then we would have way more artists to, hold up in the light other than Chance. I mean, I know that there's other independent artists that are successful, but like in terms of one that are in the mainstream media, there's not that many. Now, I think you're going to see, more like bigger artists that have, because I think what I think makes the most sense is, you do your thing, you have real fans, you build a real momentum like Russ, real momentum, own a lot of your catalog, right? Put out a bunch of music so that you own it. Then get involved with a major label if your music and your desires fit that, the longer term vision. Let them, put some more gas on the fire that you've created, but you own most of your catalog. You put out a few records through major, get the global help, get the radio, just like Russ did, and then go back independent, just like Russ did, right? But there's even a reason why he signed, right? But when you build so much on your own, you get a better deal. And, because your stuff is real and it's less risky, I'm sure you get the attention and support that you need from the label. And then, maybe make that deal as short as possible, take advantage, get to the next level, and then go back independent again. Right. Like, I think Russ played it out perfect. But even he was talking about, I didn't watch the whole interview, but he was speaking more negatively towards, towards labels, but he took advantage of a label too, except he just had a profit sharing deal as opposed to, you know, the normal recoupment that I explained a little earlier in this podcast.
Yeah, and I don't think he would have even thought to structure the deal differently if he hadn't done everything by himself up to that point.
He couldn't have, like,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have had the leverage. Like, he wouldn't have had the leverage. Um, you know, I just want people to have a clear understanding of, you know, what's really happening in the music industry so that you're not caught off guard, you know, in the event that, you know, some of you get to this level, you know, or that you just really understand what it takes to be a successful independent artist. Like, it's not easy. And there's a reason why people keep signing to these damn labels, because they haven't been able to build out the infrastructure that's required to be a successful independent artist. So, yeah.
Well, at least we all have Spotify, right?
Right.
And so the Spotify CEO has pissed everybody off by making the statement that you can't record music once every 3 to 4 years and think that's going to be enough. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Is it just Ek?
Yeah.
Daniel X. I like how you say yeah, like you're fluent in Swedish. Daniel X suggests the secret to success is not higher Spotify payout rates, but more output from musicians. So it does sound like a very familiar, you know, pull yourself up from your bootstraps kind of thing. And, you know, like when you're stuck in a job that isn't paying you enough and the boss just says, well, work harder. And I'm like, I don't think that really adds up.
Right.
And so a lot of people are reacting to that. I do know that there is a little bit of truth behind what he's saying, because we've talked about that before. The expectation that the old model that worked for the major label artists of yesterday, that's not really something that most artists can take advantage of. It's just not. I mean, so no, putting out music every 4 years is not smart. That doesn't mean you have to put music out every day, which is what the CEO is kind of insinuating. I number one, I don't agree with what he said at all, but he also left a lot open for interpretation, which is not good in this kind of conversation, because we're talking about people's livelihoods, and we're also talking about a public conversation about a very complicated topic. I mean, in order to even understand this stuff, you know, people talk about streaming rates. So in the article, it says a mid-size indie label earned 0.00348 cents per stream, and or maybe $0.00348 per stream. And you know, then they quote all these guys like Tom York from Radiohead, and it's just, as we were talking about before with the labels and the loans and the advances and all that. Most people don't get this. You know, most people don't know what a stream even is. I mean, in real practical terms, where does that money come from? And Spotify has a deal with the labels, and the labels retrofitted their agreements to accommodate Spotify without getting consent from artists. So somebody like Tom York, who was signed to a major, I don't know which major he signed to, which major Radiohead is signed to, but I'm sure they got a really bad deal out of streaming, because if the stream is only generating, you know, a percentage of a cent, and the record labels deals take the majority of that because labels own the masters of their artist music, then of course Tom York is mad about Spotify, because he's getting a very small percentage. And of course, an unsigned artist who's not generating a bunch of streams because they're not at the level that Radiohead is, they're also frustrated because they're also not generating much, but they're probably generating less money even though they own more of their music because they're just not that popular. So that's a conversation that needs to be had, just so that we can fully address what needs to happen. If we don't understand the current landscape, how are we going to create some kind of vision or plan for the future, right? And just to end my rant, because I'm sure you have a lot to say. The quote from the CEO of Spotify: "There's a narrative fallacy here, combined with the fact that obviously some artists that used to dwell in the past may not do well in this future landscape where you can't record music once every 3 to 4 years and think that's going to be enough." I think you've said that. But who is he talking to here? Is he talking to Tom York, or is he talking to a 17-year-old rapper that just put their music on Spotify for the first time last week? Because if that's the case, these are very different conversations.
Right. I think he's talking to the more established artists that have been around that haven't, taken a liking to how things work now. Right. 'Cause I think he's talking to the established, and I think he would be right. Like, just things have changed, right? More music is put out. Our attention spans have shortened. There's not big buildups for albums anymore. Like, stuff just doesn't, I mean, unless you have a song that like really sticks, stuff is not as sticky because there's so much coming out, right? There's just so much, and not even just music, just content across the board, right? Hulu, Netflix, like all this stuff vying for attention. So that I would agree with. I mean, industries change, right? And there's people that lose out when every industry evolves and changes. And like, there are people that were making a lot of money before, and it just doesn't continue into the future as it evolves and grows, right? Like, Blockbuster and warehouses where we used to rent VHS or whatever, like those aren't around because the industry just changes. Like, there's losers as industries evolve, right? And so I'm on both sides. Like, I obviously always want rates to increase. I want rates to increase, but for a lot of people that are complaining, even if we doubled or tripled the rates right now, like, you're still not making a living in music, right? But it's gonna hurt some people as the industry evolves. But my thing is like, labels are making a shitload of money from streams, right? I think that for the artists that are signed to labels, the issue is not with the streams, it's with the deals they've signed. Right. If there's this big pot of money and we're hearing that Atlantic is making millions of dollars a day in streaming, where is that? Obviously, money's being generated. So where is that money going? Right.
And it's such a convoluted conversation, too, because we have Tom York here who's going against Daniel Ek, right? Daniel Ek is worth billions. Tom York is worth tens of millions. And then you have somebody who's an unsigned artist who's worth 25,000, and they're just trying to figure out their place in this new landscape.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think artists like are gonna have to learn how to play in this environment, because if the rates change, they're not gonna change by that much. It's not gonna start being like $1 a stream or anything like that. Right. So you're gonna have to, and there are a lot of, I've said this, I'm in a broken record, but there are a lot of artists that make a lot of money, independent artists that are making a lot of money from streaming, right? And I still haven't done this research, and I don't know if this research exists, but it is my belief that there are more independent artists today than at any point in the history of music. That is just that. I'm not basing that on any research or facts. I just believe that to be true. And maybe I will dedicate some time at some point to research it, but if we take that as true, like, I don't really have that big of an issue with streaming, because, I still see the checks that we get from Funk Volume, and Funk Volume's been dead for, 5 years. And I see the money that's still generated from songs that came out 5 years ago. But we had a really tight relationship with the fans. We had a big fan base. We did it all independent. So I think that's ultimately why I'm not like rah, like down with the streaming services, because how can I be? And I still see money that's coming in from music that came out 5 years ago. And I'm like, well, if this is what you can create independently, well, shit, this is a pretty good deal. Like this is a pretty good deal. So again, man, I think it's especially with the major label artists, I could see why, I can see why they're upset. And then when Tom Gray came on our podcast, he really made me feel for like songwriters and people like that, the other players that are involved. But my experience has never been with just flat out songwriters, right? I'm dealing with hip hop artists who write their own music. So it wasn't like we had songwriters or anything like that. So there are some players that are gonna get screwed. But again, going back to my analogy with like Blockbuster and Warehouse, like there are always players that get screwed as things evolve, right? Even going from CDs to downloads, right? Like people were making a shitload of money selling CDs. There's a high margin on a CD sale, right? It costs $1 or less to print up a CD. Sometimes CDs were getting sold for $15 or $10 or whatever. That's that's high margin on a product. We want to sell as many CDs as possible. But in every industry and not outside of entertainment, like every industry evolves, and it's competition, and whoever's doing it the old way and is not able to adapt is probably gonna get the short end of the stick.
Well, here's something that I think you'll agree with, which is that when the CEO says you can't just put music out every 3 to 4 years and expect that to be it, I know you agree with that, but I guess the implication there is, and this is how a lot of the articles have been written, the implication is that artists have to cheapen the value of their product and just pump music out that they don't feel is necessarily as good as it could be because they're rushing it. I have a problem with that interpretation because, as we know, content on the internet is much more diverse than music. And so, no, putting out an album once every 3 years isn't the way to keep your fans engaged. There are artists that can do this as an aspiring artist who doesn't have a big catalog, a big back catalog. You're gonna go broke doing that. But that doesn't mean hide out in between albums, and it doesn't necessarily mean release a song every other day either. I mean, if that's what you want to do, if that works for you, if that's what your process is like, do that. But at the same time, the expectations have changed. And I think this is a feeling of apprehension that a lot of creatives don't talk about, which is their resistance, not to putting music out every day, but their resistance to branding themselves and putting out content every day. Because I know you've had these conversations, I have too, with recording artists or producers or whoever who just are so resistant to the concept of being engaging, of releasing contents and building a fan base organically. They want the music to do it all. And this is a good opportunity to really explore ways where an artist can stay engaging, can continue releasing content that isn't necessarily an album. It's a lot easier to go on Instagram Live. It's a lot easier to take cool pictures throughout your day. It's a lot easier to share your thoughts and feelings with your supporters than it is to drop an album every quarter. And oftentimes sharing your life with your fans and your supporters, or potential fans and potential supporters, is a lot more valuable than dropping an album all the time. And so that's a part of the conversation that I didn't find in any of these articles. It was all, resisting or pushing back or challenging the CEO's statements or agreeing with the CEO's statements. But the CEO, he's not a musician. What advice is he going to give an independent or unsigned artist that's actually valuable, other than put out more music? Yeah, okay. You're telling that to Radiohead. You're telling that to NBA YoungBoy. Who like? Everybody's different. Everybody's branding is different. But the fact of the matter remains, if you're going to be a career creative, you have to figure that out. You have to figure out what works for you, and you have to have some kind of plan to continually engage your audience. Whoever that audience is, figure out who the audience is, figure out what they want from you, figure out what they like, and engage them. It doesn't have to be an album all the damn time. It can be something else.
Yeah, and to that, I mean, I would say two things. Like, you are going to be expected to put out more music, so get better. Like, there's artists that are able to put out more music consistently, right? Quality music, and not sacrifice quality, right? So, collaborate with others, find better producers, continue to find better engineers, and always work on the quality of your music. Come up with creative ideas, because you're going to be required to make more music than, artists of 10, 15 years ago. But like Payne said, like, you're going to have to figure out your messaging and your branding and how you want to engage and interact with people in between music releases. Sometimes it's a podcast, sometimes it's going live. Figure out a structure and a plan that makes sense so that you can continue to build momentum even when you're not releasing music. Like, it's a different game. And instead of complaining, because it's not changing, like, I don't feel like we're gonna do away with streaming and go back to downloads or go back to CDs. So what is the point of complaining? Like, we see there are people winning in this environment. So follow them. What are they doing? Why are they making so much money in streaming? Why are the labels making so much money in streaming? And then figure out what your plan of attack is going to be. Because if your plan is to continue to complain until rates get at a point where you feel like you're going to be able to live off your music, good luck with that one. Like, it's not going to change much. If the rates increase, it's not going to be a life-changing increase. You're going to have to adapt to how artists are winning in this environment, right? There's an artist that I'm working with right now who's been in the game for decades, and she doesn't know how to interact and engage with fans because she's never had to do it. Well, that's cool. Like, but you're going to have to learn in today's environment if you don't still have the support of the major record label that you've had, when you were younger. Like, it's just it's a different game. And like I said, every industry evolved. This is not specific to the music industry. Every industry is going to evolve and change. And there's going to be some people that lose if they stuck in the way they always wanted to do things. So, I don't really know what to say. Like, I'm not all the way in Daniel's camp, but I'm more towards his camp than, the other direction. So, and that's why we have the Music Entrepreneur Club, so we can learn how to build our business to survive in this environment. That's why we had a sync panel, so you can learn how to, what you need to do to learn how to get placements in television and films and video games. Like, that's why we had a marketing panel to understand the tools that you have available to you to grow and engage your audience. So,
and on that note, beatstars.world is where you view these sessions. They were free when they were live, but they're still free now that they're archived. I know there's a conspiracy out there that Dame and I are just doing this podcast to try to funnel money into Music Entrepreneur Club. Which is a hilarious conspiracy theory because Music Entrepreneur Club is free and all of our content is freely available. Shout out to BeatStars for making that possible. Our content is on their platform, www.beatstars.world. You can learn more about their distribution. You can learn more about their publishing admin deal with Sony ATV, and you can learn more about their racial justice initiatives, plus a whole lot of other stuff going on in that community. BeatStars.world. Once again, I'm DJ Payne 1. He's Dame Ritter. Thank you for tuning in. This was episode 59. Peace.
Peace.